Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I have a couple of things we want to do, and I think that for the record, because we don't know when live streaming will actually start, that there's a couple of items that I need to go over first, but we will begin by saying that this is the Spark Task Force Executive Committee meeting, and it is scheduled for Monday, June 22nd at 11 a.m., and it is supposed to be being publicly streamed. So just for the record, we need to remind everybody on the call that at each of our meetings, all committee members, staff, and presenters must and will state their name and title prior to each time they speak or vote. All participants within the discussion must mute microphones, phones, and other electronic devices so that it does not interfere with remote listeners viewing. And prior to voting, each motion needs to be clearly stated, followed by the announcement of a final roll call. The chair will clearly identify any member of the committee that holds a responsibility to sign any binding documents for this body. We will also additionally address whether there is public comments, and if so, what the process will be. And then when committees hold meetings that might be closed to the public, we will provide notice with a brief explanation to why this is acceptable under the Kansas Open Meetings Act. So those are kind of the rules and regulations. We have the agenda before you where we'll call to order. That'll be followed by Cheryl Harrison Lee, our Executive Director, who will update the committee on activities and items that have occurred since the last time we met. And then before us today, we have a review and approval of a county resolution that will go to all counties in the state that are receiving funding. And then we will review and approve the fiscal year 21 expenditures. And this is for the actual recovery office, which we fall under as the Spark Task Force Executive Committee. Then we want to begin to start the discussion on our round 2 of funding, followed by going over our meeting schedules and then adjournment. So we are officially called to order. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over. Again, I'm Lyle Butler. I'm the chair of the Spark Task Force Executive Committee and the actual task force. So we're going now to our agenda item number 1, which we've just concluded. And now we move to agenda item number 2, which will be the director's report. So Cheryl, please update us on some of the activities that have been going on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cheryl Harrison Lee, Executive Director of Recovery. So updates from the State Finance Council. Following Monday's meeting of the Spark Executive Committee, the governor called a State Finance Council meeting to review and approve 5 CARES Act agenda items. 3 were recommendations from the Executive Committee. The Executive Committee recommended and the Finance Council approved round 1 expenditures in the amount of $400 million from the Coronavirus Relief Fund to Kansas counties. The Executive Committee recommended and the State Finance Council approved reimbursing state agencies in the amount of $16.76 million from the CRF expenses incurred in fiscal year 20. The Executive Committee recommended approval of expenditures for fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21 administrative costs for the Recovery Office and the Spark Task Force. The State Finance Council approved the fiscal year 20 budget in the amount of $63,000, but did not take action on the fiscal year 21 budget in the amount of $986,000. In addition, the governor requested and the State Finance Council approved an allocation of $26.2 million from the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, or GEAR Fund, for the Kansas Board of Regents. And finally, the governor requested and the State Finance Council approved state agencies to expend aid received directly to supplement existing programs. This was required because there was a drafting error that was discovered in the legislative compromise bill. These funds are those funds that are examples include unemployment, CDBG funds from the Department of Commerce, or any type of enhanced nutritional assistance from the Department of Children and Families. Additionally, members of the State Finance Council expressed some concerns with the dates that are in the resolution, and that resolution is before you today so that we can look at that process and look at perhaps adjusting those dates. They also expressed interest in exploring ways the state could use the CARES Act funding to strengthen the state's unemployment fund and to encourage the Spark Task Force to develop a program in round 2 that would provide relief to small businesses. The next State Finance Council meeting is Thursday, June 25th, and they will review actions that are taken by the Executive Committee today. So updates for meetings. In an effort to standardize the committee meetings, we'd like to begin a routine meeting schedule with the Executive Committee meeting every other Monday at 11 o'clock, so that this body's next meeting would then be July 6th at 11 o'clock. The Steering Committee will meet virtually on Tuesday, June 30th. And the plan is for these meetings to eventually fall into a routine meeting schedule as well. And we are still working on that. That will allow us to most effectively tap into their expertise. Updates on round 1 funding. On Friday, counties were formally notified of the total allocation they can expect in round 1. An initial run of per county funding inadvertently mixed up the population totals for Marshall, McPherson, and Marion counties. We've notified each of these counties individually, as well as members of the State Finance Council. There was no impact to the total allocation of funds for round 1. Following today's action on the resolution, we will distribute the resolution to counties and we'll ask them to return them by July 13th. By July 15th, on July 15th, we will then begin distributing funds. In addition, we are hosting a webinar for technical assistance in conjunction with the Kansas Association of Counties this Friday, June 26th, and we will be working with the KAC to explore other avenues where we can partner to provide additional support and assistance to county governments. Mr. Chairman, that completes the director's report.
So are there questions from the Executive Committee relating to the items that you just heard discussed, or comments? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to agenda item number 3, and that is for the Executive Committee to review and approve the county resolution. This is the resolution that we wanted to see so that all counties clearly understood what their roles were. And I think an important element that we passed, and Senator Denning originally made that motion, was to ensure that the counties would work with their local municipalities and school districts in their particular county. And so at this time, we will go over and turn this item over to Vijay, who will introduce this particular agenda item.
Good morning, everyone. This is Vijay Ramasamy. I'm on the policy team here at the governor's office. So this morning, we're going to go through the resolution. I'm going to share my screen for the benefit of everybody that would be watching this later. If you give me 1 second here. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. If anybody can't, please let me know. So we're going to be going through the county resolution to receive CARES Act funding. This is directly related to the $400 million that was approved by the State Finance Council last week, but would apply to any funds that would be going to the counties as a result of the work that this committee is doing. So this resolution will, after your approval, will be sent out to counties, and they will have a deadline of July 13th to pass this resolution within their counties. The resolution is drafted very similar to other resolutions that have come out of the governor's office during the time of coronavirus. So you'll see that the whereas clauses are very similar to other resolutions, executive orders, underlining and illustrating the importance of transparency, accountability, giving a background on the work of this committee, and kind of just illustrating the time that we're in related to COVID-19. So the whereas clauses are obviously subject to change based on the specific county. If there's other things that they want to highlight in those whereas clauses, they can do so. These carry no weight. They're just an explainer for why we're actually issuing this resolution. So I'm going to go through the resolution section by section. If anybody has any questions, please interrupt me and I can answer them. And then there's a couple of discussion points at the end that I would like the committee to consider and discuss before we kind of move this for approval. So this resolution, the first section basically states, again, the purpose of the CARES Act. So this is taken directly from the language of the CARES Act and illustrates what the funds may be used for. And so it just takes direct language from the act and says they can be used for necessary expenditures incurred through the public health emergency, and funds that are not accounted for in the budget, and gives a timeline for when those costs can be incurred. The second section are just examples from the CARES Act and from federal guidance of what can be spent. So it gives the counties a baseline to work through of, this is what I can spend the money on, this is what I can't spend the money on. So section 2 is examples of things that the local government can spend money on. There have been some questions related to the grants and loans to small businesses, because those can be spent for business interruptions caused by required closures. We're hoping to provide some more guidance to counties on how that can be used for filling in revenue shortfalls while local governments can't. So we're going to be definitely giving counties some more information on that. Section 3 is just the opposite of Section 2. It is what you can't spend money on. So it just illustrates that severance pay, legal settlements, workforce bonuses, other things directly taken from the CARES Act of what you can't spend money on. Section 4 reiterates that coronavirus relief fund payments cannot be used to supplant revenue shortfalls. It can only be used to supplement existing programs as it relates to costs from COVID-19. This paragraph was directly taken from the Congressional Research Service and the CARES Act related documentation that they have provided. Section 5, I think, will be the subject of some discussion today. The Section 5 basically illustrates for the counties the reporting and recoupment schedule as it relates to any CARES Act funding provided at the county level. Originally, the discussion in the State Finance Council centered on the dates in which counties would have to submit their direct spending plan. Direct spending plan refers to what the county is going to spend money on with all of the funds that are not used immediately for reimbursement. So originally, the resolution had September 15th as the date in which counties were required to submit their direct aid plan to the state, direct spending plan to the state. Based on discussion at the State Finance Council, specifically for multiple members of the State Finance Council, illustrating the need for this committee and the state to know earlier what counties are going to spend their money on, they suggested that we move the date back. There wasn't a specific date suggested in the State Finance Council, but they mentioned that it would be earlier the better for counties letting us know what they want to spend the money on, so that you all and other members of the state and the recovery office can know specific spending priorities at the local level and adjust the state priorities or provide feedback accordingly. So originally, counties were supposed to provide their first reconciliation of reimbursements and their spending plan by September 15th. We have suggested for the committee today that be moved back to August 15th. So on August 15th, they will have to submit their receipts for the first round of reimbursement, and they will have to submit their spending plan for any funds that are not reimbursed. The second portion of that relates to when the funds that are both not reimbursed and not used in their spending plan would be given back to the state for recoupment. We have suggested a date of September 15th, 1 month after they submit their plans. We think that this is a reasonable timeline for us to review their plan, let them know about any ineligible expenditures that they've planned for, and then recoup any funds that they are not willing to, or that or that counties say, hey, this is something that we can't spend money on, or we don't know what to do with, we're willing to give this back to the state. We think giving them a month and giving us a month to do so makes sense. We've developed a process for directly getting those funds through a wire transfer from the counties as soon as they submit to us what funds that they're not going to be using, and then the state can decide what it wants to spend it on after that. So that is the original, that is the difference between the original resolution and what we've presented for you today. After that, every month, as the committee passed a motion for during their first meeting, counties will be required to provide a reconciliation starting on September 15th, the same date that they would have to submit money back to the state. So September 15th, November 1st, December 1st, and December 30th are all dates in which counties would have to reconcile all of their spending, submit a report to the state, and if there are any other receipts that they have to submit to the state at that point. On December 30th, this again, we'll go through another recruitment process. If there's anything that hasn't been spent by December 30th, and we're still getting a response back from the feds on if we can spend past that date. But as of now, any funds that are not spent by December 30th would be given back to the state, which will then be given back to the federal government. And we'll get to this point of discussion on the end, but I want to just prime everybody. One of the points of feedback that we've gotten from counties is that it would be difficult for counties to submit receipts every month because they have to go through an internal process of then getting receipts from all of the cities, educational institutions, businesses that they have provided money to. So they felt that if they submit one set of receipts on November 1st, it only gives them 10 to 15 days to get all of the receipts from the counties, and then they have to go through and work through all of their receipts and get another submission done by December 1st. So one of the points of discussion is, should we give them more time so that we actually get all of the receipts from both the cities that they've gave money to and from the counties, if that makes sense. And we'll discuss that at the end. Section 6 is specifically taken and adapted from the Kansas Open Records Act and the Open Meetings Act. It just ensures that any county that receives funding will make all meetings publicly accessible, similar to what the state is doing, and any materials or make public any process for groups, residents, anybody to submit comments, requests, anything of that nature. Section 7 is specific to the county's, the SPARK committee's second motion on their first meeting relating to a pledge at the county level to then appropriate funds to educational and municipal entities within their counties. So making sure that they're actually creating a process to give money to the cities. This would basically put that into law and codify it at the county level. There was one question from counties about, what if you have a school that's along multiple county lines, or you have a district or a county hospital that's along multiple county lines? Who is in charge of providing money to that hospital, that school, that municipal entity? And we've put in language that says that it's dependent on where the headquarters is. So if the school's district office is in your county, you're responsible for that school district, even if maybe some of their schools are located in a different county. Section 8 specifically relates to the impact of COVID-19 on racial minorities. So originally, the resolution required counties to submit a plan related to how they would incorporate racial disparities within their decision-making calculus as it relates to COVID-19 funds. Because a lot of the smaller counties in the state, it would be kind of very difficult for them to submit multiple plans within the short time frame. What we have said is that by signing this resolution, you have pledged to consider and incorporate the effects of these disproportionate impacts in your direct aid plan. So at least one section within your direct aid plan that says, hey, this is how we've considered the disproportionate impact on specifically Black populations in the state of Kansas or within our county, or specifically Latinx populations within our county. Section 9 basically says that in the event of any audits or in the event of any inquiries by the federal government or by the state, that the county agrees to cooperate, and that they agree to be responsible for any ineligible expenditures that are made at the county level, or any ineligible expenditures made through disbursements that the counties do themselves to educational entities, small businesses, or other entities. So basically, if the state is responsible for counties, counties are responsible for any funds that they expend, just like the state would be for round 2 and round 3 funding through the Spark Committee, basically mirroring that process. And it also means that they agree to pay any debt that's incurred to them because of ineligible expenditures based on just the funding that we provide to them. And they can even mirror this process to cities within their county, but this is just for our relationship with the counties. Section 10 basically just says that they understand that the Office of Recovery and the United States Department of the Treasury may issue additional guidance, and that guidance may evolve over time, and that we will provide additional information moving forward, just kind of illustrating and undergirding the state's responsibility to make sure that there are specific tools for them to use, like the county toolkit, for example. That is the resolution. We can start with questions, but I want to just illustrate that the 2 points of discussion that I would say are, one, confirming the dates for the direct aid plan and the recoupment of funds, the initial recoupment of funds, and discussing the dates in which counties would have to submit their reconciliation, knowing that they then have to take time to get receipts back from cities and schools and other entities within their counties. So those are the 2 points of discussion, but I'll open it up to questions and other comments.
Hey, Vijay, this is Tom Bell. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Got those 2 points. If I could just ask a little bit more of a background question. What does a county have to agree to actually get the money? So I think you said this is kind of a template. So could they take out Section 8 or Section 6 and say, we're not going to agree to share it with municipalities and still get the money?
So our expectation is that if they are going to receive funds from the state, that they have to pass the resolution as is, except for the whereas clauses. So that's the only place that they, if there are, and I will say, if there are specific things within the resolution that there is a legal issue with the county agreeing to for any specific reason, we'll definitely work with them on that. But our expectation is that they pass all of the sections as is in order to receive funding.
Okay, thank you.
So probably we need to move. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Well, I was just going to, is there a sense that the State Finance Council is comfortable with those dates that are inserted in there, the suggested dates?
I would say that during the discussion, and Senator Denning, I would, if you want to jump in here, but one of the points of discussion was to actually maybe move it to August or have an August date. And I think that, so I think the State Finance Council, although I'm not sure, I would say that that was a part of the discussion during the meeting. The other thing that I would say is, I think this is probably the earliest we can go, considering that we are going to be giving, we're just now going to be giving them this resolution. We're going to be then giving them the funds, and it's going to take them some time to develop a plan as we give them more guidance. But I will let other folks answer and chime in on that.
This is Senator Denning. The State Finance Council did have some discussion on compressing the reporting dates. And given the short fuse, I think they do want to compress the dates as reflected in this new resolution. I think as we get additional guidance, flexibility will come into play, but right now I think the Finance Council was wanting a condensed schedule with the full understanding as we get more guidance and things play out that it could change. I think one of the comments I have on that subject is, I believe it's page 3, section 5, subsection E, which would be the final report, where it says on December 30th, 2020, counties will provide a fifth and final. So just knowing how accounting cycles work, I would recommend that we put, I know we don't have much guidance, but instead of being really rigid that we say on December 30th, 2020, counties will provide, I wonder if we should change that to on February 1st of 2021, counties will provide a fifth and final as of December 30th, 2020, to give them 30 days to get their accounting cycle up to date. I think asking them to do it on December 30th is almost an impossible ask. I think if we had the flexibility, I know we don't have much guidelines, but if we can change that final report to February 1st and have the final report as of December 30th, it would give them 30 days to get their accounting cycle up to speed. I think
And this is Elise Martini. I agree with Senator Denning. It doesn't make sense when they're trying to spend it all on the date that the last part's due, that we're, requiring them to account for it right then. So it makes sense.
Yeah, that we need to give them a little bit of flexibility to get their invoices in and so forth. So
I think that's a good suggestion. Do you think there's a problem with that, doing that way?
So I think one thing that we would have to check on, I think it is a good suggestion. One thing that we have to check on is if that would work with what the federal government is thinking in terms of when we would have to provide them the final kind of recoupment of funds for anything that was unspent, and when they would want the final accounting. Again, I don't know if they want it specifically by that date, but that's something we can check in on. But I think in terms of giving kind of flexibility and making sure that they have time, I think that makes a lot of sense.
So if we're not going to make the change, then I think we all need to be in agreement that realistically, we may need to make that change if the feds let us. It'd be virtually impossible for an entity of any size to be able to do that on December 30th without taking a guess. So we can leave it the way it is, but I think we need to be in agreement that that's an unrealistic date. And if we have guidance and flexibility in the future, that we need to be able to change it.
Is all the executive committee in concurrence with that?
Denning is.
This is Jill Docking. That makes sense. You're going to leave it as it is. And if we have a little wiggle room via the federal government, we know that we'll possibly change it. Is that what you're saying, Senator?
That is correct.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
I have a
Tom?
point of clarification when it's appropriate also. Is this a good time?
Tom, are you okay with this discussion?
This is Tom Bell. Yes, I'm okay with that.
Okay. So,
You want to
Jill,
survey everybody? You want to survey everybody on that point of discussion, Elise too?
Yep.
And
I think
Elise
everybody,
Martini. I also
concur.
agree.
Okay. So Jill, your comment?
The extension of the funds to cities and to entities within the county. Now, does this apply to Johnson County and Sedgwick County who got their money directly? This particular document?
So
No, I don't think it does, because they got their money directly, but impact aid that we sent to those two counties that we have a responsibility for, I think we can enforce that, I believe.
So I think Senator Denning in the last meeting tried to encourage everybody to share. Is that being done on the direct federal money, or do we have any ability to affect that? Senator?
Denny, just piling on with what Jill just said, I was hoping that this document would apply to Johnson and Sedgwick. Again, Johnson has been very public saying until just recently, until we made that initial motion, that they were not going to share. They've relaxed that stance since we made the motion, but I was hoping this document would apply to them as well. If it doesn't, then I think we need to pass some kind of separate resolution for them on point number 7 is, I think it's important that they do share in the allocation, and especially on the direct aid with reimbursing their local units of government for incurred expenses. I think that would be absolutely wrong if a city or a taxing entity has $10,000 in PP expenses and have an actual invoice and not get reimbursed by Johnson County. I think that would be just simply bad policy to let stand.
I think we need some clarification maybe from Cheryl or somebody else on the staff.
So one thing that I would say is, so because they receive their money from the federal government, I think in terms of like forcing or like a legal mechanism for all of the money that was received from the federal government, we don't have jurisdiction over that. What we can do, and I think what the expectation was, and Cheryl, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the expectation is that Johnson County and Sedgwick County would sign this resolution, both as a indication that they're willing to do it with the money they've already gotten, but also, like the chairman said, for any money that we're giving them through impact aid. So our expectation is that Johnson and Sedgwick would also sign this resolution. And again, it is a resolution, and so it is a tacit agreement by the county to follow all of these specific sections.
Cheryl Harrison Lee is director. That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
This is Jill Docking. So there's no legal obligation to do that with the direct federal funds, is what I'm hearing, right?
That would be correct.
Okay.
It doesn't prevent us from passing a separate resolution or a separate motion that we send to the 2 counties that got their federal money, but I don't think we have legal jurisdiction over it, is what I'm hearing.
All right.
Everything correctly, it is the expectation for Johnson and Sedgwick to sign this resolution or to act on it, and it would be in their best interest to do that. If they don't, then they can expect some other action which will not be as favorable. So on point number 7 is what we've been talking about. I just throw this out for discussion. We talk about reimbursement, which is the direct aid piece. Did we also add just one sentence that says, provide reasonable evaluation of any indirect aid request? Would that make the cities feel a little bit more comfortable? If we added just one sentence that says, provide reasonable evaluation of any indirect aid request from the local units of government. Should we go that far to give the cities a little bit more assurance that they're going to get some appropriation if needed?
Comments from the executive committee?
Yes.
Or feelings? Everybody's pondering it.
Yeah, Elise Martini, I do believe that if we could kind of strengthen it a little bit with a line that may get it a little bit more better for the cities. I don't know if that's the proper way to do it as I review this sentence, but it'd be nice to have a little bit more teeth in this document for those counties that got it directly from the feds. That's just my comment.
I think it's clear that if the local units of government produce a invoice that shows that they had a direct expense, I think point number 7 clearly says that the counties should reimburse. But if they have some idea on a program on the indirect aid, we've kind of left them out there on their own. I don't know. I think adding that sentence would just give them a little bit more of an assurance if they had a need for the indirect aid, at least it would be evaluated. Not necessarily agreed to, but give them a fair shake.
So we just don't want to leave it as just reimbursement.
I think we're only talking about reimbursement on section 7. That's why I thought if we added that sentence about providing a reasonable evaluation of any indirect aid request.
I'm certainly open to that. This is Lyle Butler.
Jill Docking, I'm open to it. Are we legally okay doing that? Surely we have some lawyer here, right? Do we know what the legality is before we do something like that?
Jill, this is Denny. I think that's part of the overall limited guidance that we've been given. I think that just falls into place there. I don't think we're getting outside of our guidance.
Okay.
Pretty clear the way I understood it at this point in time.
Well, I will defer to you, Senator, and agree if you are comfortable with that.
Yeah, obviously I'm comfortable, and if it's wrong, we can fix it, but I'm fairly comfortable that that falls within the guidance parameter.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think we can also confirm any of these points that the committee is making with our legal counsel before we into the resolution, and let you guys know what is allowed and what is not allowed.
Okay, so I've heard from Jill and the senator, Tom and Elise.
This is Tom. I'm comfortable.
Elise Martini, I agree.
Okay, so I think we have a consensus to look at that change and to consult with our legal, unless Cheryl or somebody else has some other information that would prevent us from doing that. Okay.
Cheryl Harrison Lee, Executive Director. No, we will follow up with legal.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, do we need a formal motion for any of this, or should we? We've got notes taken, but I don't know if we need a formal motion to.
Yeah, I think if you're keeping that, when we do a general motion, unless the executive committee would like to go and do each section, we can just, if you're taking the notes, I think there's consensus on all of these that, and before we take a formal vote, we'll go back and have you review the changes to make sure you've gotten them written down so that we all clearly understand what we're voting on. Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay. Other questions or comments on any of the items? I had one question. Again, it's on section 7. When we were talking the original motion that Senator Denning did, and I know here we have educational. In a lot of counties in the state, there are Regents universities or Regents schools. There's also private colleges. And so I just want to understand from the executive committee that educational, what that encompasses. Because originally when we had the discussion back a couple of executive committees ago, I think it was targeted to those that were taxing entities. And I just want to have some clarification from the committee and from staff what we believe that means.
It is up for discussion if we want to make it more broad. I think the original intent was for it to be public entities within those counties.
And that's my understanding. And this is Lyle Butler, the chair. But if we just use the word educational, what does that mean to a county that's passing this resolution? And I don't know, Senator Denning, you made the original motion on that, and so you may have some thoughts, and maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Senator Denning, we're not hearing you.
The
There we go.
motion that we made was based on taxing authorities. So section A of point number 7, that was added probably for clarification. And we'll just use KU for instance. If KU has, you know, a site in Salina and Lawrence, they probably want to use Douglas County. Is the way I'm understanding it. Just so they don't get, just so we have one entity to deal with is my understanding.
Correct. I guess when we had the discussion, and again, I'm not trying to make a big deal about this. I completely understand that part of it is educational, assuming that it's public, and taxing entities for educational.
This is Jill Docking. Senator, I think he's just talking about private schools, right, Lyle? Is that what you're wanting to distinguish?
Yeah, and
So you want to put if a public educational entity, is that what you're?
I'm trying to get back to the executive committee to say what was our intent. I remember from our discussion, we talked about that it was public entities. And I don't know whether we have to clarify that or we feel comfortable the way that it is worded.
I see what you're saying. Because the motion was based on a taxing authority. So
Correct.
it probably would hurt to put the word public in front of educational. I think that's where you're heading.
That was my question, and because I want to go back what the intent of the committee, executive committee was in our recommendation, and so I'm just trying to get clarification. So if the county gets requested from private institutions or other entities that are not, that whether they would qualify, I'm just trying to help out when it gets to the county level.
Yeah, again, the intent was taxing entities, which would be public.
This is Jill Docking. So on the first round, I mean, if a private institution is requesting money, there are more dollars to follow, right?
Correct.
So this
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
just this particular, I'm okay with that. If that's what the intent was, is just to make it this piece public.
That was the initial intent.
Yeah.
You know, the public-private piece of the funding would take care of the non-public universities and educational facilities as well. But we just wanted to make sure that the county shared in an appropriate fashion with all of their taxing entities inside their geography.
Correct. That was my understanding.
And so that is the intent of that section.
Mr. Chairman, this is Tom Bell. I guess I hate to beat this point too much. I guess I was under the impression that if a county wanted to put together a process by which they might end up actually sharing some of that money with, you know, initiatives developed by the local chamber or whatever, they could actually do that, but that our intent with this resolution was to make it clear to them that we expected them to at least share those funds with other municipalities in the area. So maybe I'm wrong that none of the first round of money could be spent on anything that would include anything private. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, I can jump in here really quickly. I
Okay.
think our intention with the resolution is that both are true. You can spend money for a private entity within your county, but we are also saying you should be giving money to, in this case, public, educational, and municipal entities within, so you can do both. It was the intention of the resolution and this section. This was an additional ask or pledge of the county to do, to spend money to those entities.
Thank you.
So is there a need to change anything? This is Jill Docking, or are we keeping it the way it is?
I think we all understand the intent. Again, point A was added by staff. That wasn't in the motion, but I see Tom Bell's point as well. I don't know if we know what the intent is. We can either be prepared to regurgitate the intent if something comes up, or take A out. One of the two.
This is Tom Bell. I think it's okay to put public in front of those, because what we're saying is, at the very least, we think you should be sharing this money with other municipalities or public entities. And then we stop there. They can go further if they want to. That's not prohibited. But we're making it clear that public means, or the educational is related to public. So I'm okay with that. I just wanted a clarification.
Yeah, Tom, that's very good. I mean, that was the intent. That was exactly the intent.
Okay. I concur with that, Lyle Butler.
Elise Martini, I also concur.
Okay.
Jill Docking, yes.
Okay. What else on the document from the executive committee do you wish to ask questions about? Clarification?
Jill
Really?
Docking. Yeah, I just have one question. On number 4, grants or loans to small businesses. I'm not sure I understand completely what that means. No, the point, go down for additionally, right there. Such funds, however, may indirectly assist with revenue shortfalls in cases where expenses paid for by the Coronavirus Relief Fund would otherwise widen the gap between government outlays and receipts. Somebody who understands this point, just give me a quick summary, the whole point. So it can be used to pay back a business if they've expended money on equipment, product having to do with the virus, people training other people, but that's the limit, right? Do I understand that right?
So I can get you more information on this. I think it's a good question. One of the points that we're still trying to work through is that you can, like you said, you can provide grants or loans to businesses for operating expenses or other expenses related to, or other expenses incurred because of required closures. So it can be,
okay.
Yeah, because if the governor said your business is closed for this period of time, we can provide grants or loans to help you with operating expenses, because that would be COVID related. But otherwise, the other point is also correct. We can provide grants and loans to businesses to institute public health related measures, like putting barriers between booths at a restaurant or something like that.
This is Jill Docking. This is so fast that for these small businesses to know exactly what's on the table and what's not is going to be helpful. The more detail I think we provide the businesses who have been overwhelmed with how to handle all this and apply for all this, the better. That's all I wanted to add there.
Other questions? This is Lyle Butler. Other questions or comments from the executive committee before we have staff give us what notes they've taken that they're going to look into, and then we eventually will need a motion to approve and to forward this on to counties.
I would
Anything
move
else?
to do so. Joel Docking, you want a motion?
Before we do the motion, let's go ahead and have staff refer back the notes that they've taken about potential changes that we want to include in our motion.
Okay.
And then we'll do that. Okay?
Yep.
All right.
This is Vijay Ramasamy, again from the governor's office. So I'll just run through what we have. If there's anything that you have questions on, please let me know. The first thing is the executive committee is okay with moving the date to August 15th, and that the first time that funds will be recouped will be September 15th. Mr. Chairman, I just want to confirm on this point, are we okay as the executive committee keeping it month by month? Kind of related to the original discussion point of it might be difficult for counties to collect everything from their cities and then have it all reconciled by in 1 month's time. I just want to confirm that we're okay with keeping it month by month. So all of the other dates in here except for the December 30th are okay. I just want to confirm that before moving on.
This is Denny. I think that would work as long as we give some serious thought to the final reconciliation, which is point E, where we say December 30th. As long as we give them an extra 30 days to actually do a final rec, that is to say we had discussed February 1st. So I think as long as we're willing to make that change, if we can, then the rest is just preliminary. And that's what certainly this committee will want to be looking at progress, and the State Finance Council will be as well. So again, those dates they are short, but at least they're, in my mind, just an ongoing process, so we can at least monitor what's going on in the field. And then point E, when we have the final reconciliation as of December 30th, that's when we need to give everybody an extra time to do the final rec.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Denning. So we'll continue on to point E. What we have currently is to change it to February 1st, pending any additional guidance or any additional comment from the legal counsel or from the federal government. The other option would be to just say, and I think Shelby may have brought this up, to say the final date will be determined by the state or as determined by the state. So that gives us a little bit more time to give them a date when we get a response back from the federal government. But the change would be to, for now, change it to February 1st until we get additional guidance.
That would be
And
correct.
Then,
yeah.
And then to continue on here, the next change that I have specifically is to add that that counties will provide reasonable evaluation of indirect expenses submitted by municipal or public educational entities within their county. And part and parcel with that is to add the word public in front of educational to be very specific that we are, this is specifically related to public educational institutions and municipal entities. Knowing that if a county wants to submit a request or a direct sending program for a private entity or do a partnership with their local chamber, they can do so. This is just an additional point.
Correct. That's fine. That's what I think our understanding is.
So apart from that, I have no other major changes apart from the comment from Jill regarding clarification for small businesses in the guidance or in another avenue of what they can apply for and what they can't apply for. Am I missing anything?
Executive committee, anything that we missed?
Denning's good.
Elise Martini, I think that that is accurate on what we discussed, and I make a motion that we approve the amended resolution.
Is there a second?
This is Tom Bell, I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to accept with our amendments and suggestions the resolution. We'll forward on to counties. Is there other discussion or items that you wish to have clarified before we call for a vote? And we will do a roll call vote. Hearing none, then we will start going through. If you'll identify your name and your vote. And so you will vote aye if you are in favor of this resolution.
Denning votes aye.
Docking votes aye.
Martini votes aye.
Tom Bell votes aye.
Lyle Butler votes aye. So the motion carries 5-0. Thank you all for your good work on that. Appreciate it very much. So our next agenda item that we'll be discussing is the review and approval for fiscal year 21 expenditures. As you remember, our executive director, Cheryl Harrison Lee, talked about that the State Finance Council approved the fiscal year 20 budget. And so, but we wanted to get some changes for items 21. So I think Shelby Kunkel from the Office of the Lieutenant Governor is going to walk us through this approval.
Perfect. This is Shelby Kunkel, Chief of Staff to Lieutenant Governor. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So just as a general overview for the budget, this budget that's before you, and I believe you have the summary, has changes in just a few areas, but the total is a little bit more than $2 million, with 1.76 million of that being in the salaries and wages categories, and then a little under 300,000 in operating expenditures. This differs from the budget that you saw last week that State Finance Council approved in a few ways. The previous budget was an initial 6-month budget and did not address outsourcing. We weren't, as of last week, sure whether or not we would need to outsource. We've made the decision that we believe that we do need to outsource. And so there are some more specific accounting pieces that are addressed in this budget. Last week's also had a 20 FTEs, whereas this one has 21.5. And because this is a comprehensive 12-month budget, is a little bit more. So rather than the 6-month budget, we're asking for approval for the full 12-month budget. The main areas that they change that have differed are in the salaries and staffing as it relates to the staffing. The total operating expenditures, while the total changed, the budgeted items did not. So all this is total contractual services and total commodities. We took and requested 50% of that last week. This is 100% of those. So those two items in those two line items are similar to what you approved last week. A couple of things to remember on, or a couple of things to consider as we kind of talk through this. This budget is the ceiling. So this is the high-end budget for what we would be requesting. And this budget allows for accounts for adequate compliance and to develop the processes and procedures for round 2 and 3. One of the things that I think that we've been struggling with is a lack of resources and a lack of staff. Currently, Director Harrison Lee is the only staff member on the team, and then we've been using other staff within the governor's office, the lieutenant governor's office, and various state agencies. So when Vijay mentioned that we needed to go back and review with legal counsel, for example, that's some combination of general counsels in the Department of Administration and the governor's office or other agencies. And so having a dedicated staff person that can review that, that can participate in these conversations and have kind of a formal legal answer would be helpful. It also accounts for, they will also be responsible for administering all of the funds for not only the office itself, but also round 1 funds, round 2 funds, round 3 funds, and then complying with any reporting necessary. Typically, in doing research for what would be needed, we consulted with the governor's grants office. Typically, administering a federal program or federal grants has anywhere from between 5 to 10% in allowable administrative cost. 5% of the CRF would be a little bit under $52 million, and 10% would be a little bit under $104 million. So we are nowhere near that. In fact, the budget as it stands before you is only 0.25% of the total CRF. So only 0.25% would be spent on administration. The other piece that's made this a little bit more difficult, as you all have alluded to during the resolution discussion, was the limited amount of guidance that we have received, but we need to provide additional guidance to the counties and local entities that we would be providing these funds to. And so getting a team in place to develop and write that guidance and then provide the technical support, I think will be very critical. And making sure that thinking through this is really somewhat of asset protection, because we don't want to be on the hook for funding that's spent inappropriately, and because we know that we will probably be audited. So on the outsourcing question, we had earlier this week a call with several agencies within the state system to determine the most efficient way for getting funding out the door. That included Division of Budget, Department of Revenue, Department of Administration, the Treasurer's Office, and the Grants Office. So there are several agencies that are responsible, as well as several accounting systems to sync up with the state system. Unfortunately, the state will not grant an outside firm access to either the SHARP or SMART system. And so even if we outsource, there will still need to be some internal agency work that's done. And so what you'll see when we go through the FTEs is we've requested some agency accountants to ensure that we're not asking existing state employees that are paid for with the state general fund to be bearing the cost of that work. So this is kind of a general fund protection. But the decision to outsource the larger accounting pieces has kind of been made because in that conversation with those various state agencies, we learned that anywhere from 50 to 60 vouchers could be processed per week by one single budget analyst or accountant. So as you think about any one payment out of the CRF fund would be a voucher payment, the agencies can only process 50 to 60 of those per week, per person. So because the lift needs to be done so quickly and is so great, the best choice to get this money out the door at this point is outsourcing, we believe. And so that process will begin here shortly. We'll submit requests for qualifications so that way we can ensure that we have a viable consultant or contractor, and that way we are transparent and how we select that contractor. That will come before you all for approval of the expenditure, because that is not accounted for in this budget. And then once you all approve it, will then be forwarded to State Finance Council for their approval on that contract. Are there any questions on the outsourcing component? Okay, if not, then this is the recovery office structure. As you can see, There's an executive director and a deputy executive director, as well as a special assistant. And then it's broken down into 4 divisions or departments: director of community outreach, legal, finance, and investment projects directors. The investment projects division is responsible for reporting and accountability, as well as program development and compliance. This would be the team that would make sure that we are developing any programs that we would spend using the CRF in accordance with the federal guidance, and then would also help to develop the guidance for counties to get that out to them and ensure that that compliance component is being met, or out to businesses to ensure that they have the necessary reporting requirements. The director would oversee this division. The 4 grant project coordinators would be responsible for developing policies and reporting requirements. And then the performance and accountability managers would oversee the reporting, not only internally to the but also to the public. So we think it's very important that we are transparent in how we are spending these funds and where they are going. And so these 2 individuals would be responsible for reporting that out and for reviewing all of the potential project proposals and whatnot. The finance team has 6 FTEs in it. The first is the director, who would most likely oversee the outsourcing contract, then a financial analyst that would help manage the internal accounting, and then 4 internal agency accountants. As I mentioned when we were discussing the outsourcing piece, this is the component that's going to help us make sure that we're not straining the existing state agency resources, and that we're not using state general funds to use to cover CARES Act costs. We're not sure, and we'll probably wait until a decision is made with the contractor, but we think that we would likely probably put one of these in Division of Budget, one of these in Department of Revenue, one of these in the Treasurer's Office, and then one of these in the Department of Administration. Then legal, I think this is fairly self-explanatory. I think that as we were talking through the resolution, I think it's fairly clear how beneficial it would be to have one dedicated legal counsel specifically to the CARES Act, because there's going to be so much technical technical questions that will need to be asked. And then we don't think that we need a full-time paralegal. We really did approach this budgeting process through what can we reasonably, or what do we reasonably need, and where can we save some costs. And so we think that a part-time paralegal would be sufficient in this division. And then community outreach, this is the group that would be responsible for technical assistance and for answering the questions of the counties. So as they have questions about the resolutions, or as businesses have questions about how to apply, this would be the team that would be responsible for kind of bridging the gap and for helping them, because it's going to be a very technical process. The director would kind of lead the team. The community liaisons would be responsible for organizing things like the webinar that we're doing next Friday, getting information out proactively to make sure that the counties or businesses or private entities that would be applying for funds fully understand the process and know what would be expected of them, and then helping to aid them in that application process. And then the legislative liaison would maintain communications with State Finance Council to make sure that we are acting in concert with what they are hoping to see, and then also would be a point of contact for the legislature. You have here salary ranges for all of those positions. Rather than listing out each individual position and the total, we've put these in a range format to preserve the ability to competitively negotiate some of these salaries. And so you can see there the various ranges on those positions, and then as well as how many positions there are. I think that covers the budget as it stands. If there are any questions either on what I just went through or the budget summary that you have before you, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, executive committee, questions, comments, suggestions?
Elise Martini, can you go back to that last slide that had the range of the different salaries? Thank you. And one question I had in the budget is just from other task force, I know with COVID it makes it a little different, but we did travel on the road and went out to certain areas to do town halls and things like that. And I'm just kind of using the transportation task force as an example. Is this strictly all going to be done by Zoom, and with COVID and all, you don't see any, besides the directors having to travel, you don't see any actual meetings? I don't think COVID is going to change between now and then, but basically this will all be done through Zoom and through conference calls and things like that, except for the committee meeting in Topeka.
Shelby Kunkel, Chief of Staff to Lieutenant Governor. If you look on the budget summary that you were provided, it does have a budget allowance of $22,500 in the travel budget. That was to cover the expenses, any traveling expenses or mileage from either the
And Shelby, you broke up a little bit on the tail end of your, and yeah, I looked at that being so low that was more for individual travel as the staffing was going around the state. I was just asking if you thought if there was going to be any, I guess you really can't gather right now, so.
Yeah, so we put some funding in that would allow for some travel, but not a lot, just because we did a fair amount of this because of COVID will be staffed or will take place via video conference or Zoom. But there is some budget in there as a contingency should we be able to travel.
Yeah, that was my comment. It just seemed low. Thank you.
Other questions?
This is Tom Bell. This is something, Mr. Chairman, that we're going to approve, but the State Finance Council ultimately is going to be looking at this as well. Is that right?
That is correct.
So I guess my question is, what is this in? Is this responsive to the direction of the State Finance Council? Is there a sense that there's a comfort level at that level with this new budget?
Shelby Kunkel, Chief of Staff for the Lieutenant Governor. Senator Denning, please jump in if I am misrepresenting anything from State Finance Council. But they had a few concerns. The first of which was that we were showing them only a partial budget for 6 months versus the full fiscal year. So we addressed that here. They also wanted to see a higher, a ceiling type budget, right? So what would be the most that we would need to spend, or what do we think would be the highest amount that we would need, rather than a lower estimate. They wanted, I think, a full picture of what the fiscal costs on the administrative side for operating expenditures for the office would be. And so we've accounted for that. That's why we've added the additional FTEs and made the recommendation of outsourcing. We don't have an estimate yet on what outsourcing could cost as a total, but we know that we'll need to account for that moving forward as well. And then I think they just wanted a little bit more information regarding the structure, what the departments look like and how they are divided up and what their responsibilities are. So I think that I hope that this does address those concerns, yes. But if Senator Denning has anything to add to that, I'll defer to him.
So this is Senator Denning. What Shelby outlined was what the State Finance Council had brought up as some of its concerns. I think what they'll be looking for when we present the budget is, now that we have this slide with these spots, they'll probably want a little bit of a job description of what the activity will be. That will probably come up, and I think Shelby's prepared to do that. So I think it'll go a bit smoother this next time, especially when you put it into perspective that the entire budget is 0.25 of a basis point to fund the whole entire budget. So I think it's, even though 2 million is a big number, when you look at it as 0.25 of 1 basis point, it seems reasonable to me. And I think when she goes through a little bit of the job descriptions, or if Lyle presents it, goes through some of the job descriptions, I think that'll get a comfort level. Governor Kelly was actually the member that made the motion to only approve 20 and to postpone 21. So I think she probably felt that the committee was going to ask for some details, so she just short-circuited it and give us enough time to circle back around to get a little bit more detail, is the way I read it. A question for Shelby. The document piece that I've got has an FY20 estimate of 43,345. I don't think that's the amount that the State Finance Council approved. I think we approved a bit higher number.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that I've got 2 documents with 2 different numbers now for FY20, which has already been approved.
Yes, I'm looking at that now. Shelby Conkle, Chief of Staff to the Lieutenant Governor. Yes, last week the office, the executive committee approved 63,000, and the State Finance Council approved 63,000. I'll have to go back and look. What I think it was a formula error from the worksheets that gave us that 43,000, and I must have just updated the a form that hadn't been updated with the proper formula, but it was 63,000, and I will circulate after this an updated copy that reflects the 63,000 number. I believe it was in contractual services. I think that the formula hadn't pulled over from other contractual services. So I will confirm that and follow back up with everyone.
Yeah, you'll notice in contractual services, it didn't bring anything over, and then it doubled up professional. So I think your error is going to be in those 2 categories, but you'll certainly want to clean that up before we come back.
Yes, sir.
And then at the end of the document where it says FY19 and FY20, are those off by 1 year? At the very end, should it be FY20 and FY21 at the very end of the document?
Yes, sir. We'll make that change as well.
That's all I had.
Thank you, Senator. Other questions from the executive committee? I was also at the State Finance Council too, and I think it's been covered by Shelby and the Senator very well. So I appreciate the comments. If there, I don't want to end discussion. This is an important thing. We will need a motion to approve sending this on to the State Finance Council. And as our executive director told us that they're planning on meeting this Thursday, so this item will be taken up Thursday.
Jill Docking, I would move to do so with the corrections added by people on the committee.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Denning will second. And the motion is to move the FY21 budget on to State Finance Council. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification. That's our motion. We have a motion and we have a second. Any other questions or discussion before we vote? And again, we'll do a roll call vote. So committee members weigh in. Aye stands for approval.
Docking, aye.
Martini, aye.
Bell, aye.
Senator Denning made the motion, so
Denny, aye.
all right. And Lyle Butler is aye. So the motion carries 5-0. Thank you all. Thank you, Shelby. Appreciate it. Going back to our agenda, we now turn it over to our Executive Director, Cheryl Harrison Lee, who will have some preliminary comments for round 2 discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cheryl Harrison Lee, Executive Director. So we are still awaiting guidance on whether the December 30th date in the CARES guidance we received is for encumbrance or expenditure of the funds. As such, we've had some additional conversations regarding broadband and the impact of the December date and completion. We know that we had some challenges across the state with internet service access and education, as well as telemedicine. At the joint meeting of the steering committee and the executive committee, we discussed the 4 areas of education, economic development, health, and infrastructure. So one of the things that we'd like to get is the executive committee's thoughts on adjusting the focus from infrastructure to connectivity and technology, given some of the cost and the time frame to really be able to deploy broadband. It would give us an opportunity to evaluate some of the education needs and try to ensure that we have online education capability across the state, as well as some of the health needs that Senator Denning brought up at our initial executive committee meeting. We also heard from the State Finance Council about looking at unemployment and looking at an approach that allows agency secretaries to propose needs. So we're wanting to also get your input on a process that allows for agency requests that runs parallel to the broader request for proposals. And if that is something we would like to know, if you'd like to have that discussion at the next meeting in terms of a process that would allow us to look at the agencies and seeing how they might propose some projects that we can do through agencies, as well as our public-private partnership. And then finally, in addressing the State Finance Council's concern about small businesses, that we would look at a program with Commerce that will provide some relief for small businesses. So we're looking for the executive committee today to give us some feedback on round 2 on 1, should we bring some proposals or be talking with you about the agencies, the state agencies, having a process where they don't compete with public-private and they would have some type of set-aside, as well as a small business program, and then looking at unemployment. And we'll need to gather some information for you on what that fund looks like and how this might work. And then if you'd like to look at connectivity and technology instead of the infrastructure component. So looking for feedback, Mr. Chairman, on how we might structure the next meeting for you, which will be in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thoughts and comments to some of the questions that our executive directors propose.
Mr. Chairman, this is Tom Bell. With regard to the comment about connectivity, the one thing that seemed to really flow through every discussion we had was that idea. So I would definitely be in favor of that.
Thank you.
This is Jill Docking. Can somebody give me an example of the agency request? Just one agency. Tell me what you're talking about here.
So if we were to look at something with Department of Commerce, we would look at perhaps setting up maybe some type of grant program for small businesses that would perhaps allow them to consider setting up their businesses so that they would have the appropriate things in place to be able to open and remain open, such as, some of the larger entities already have plexiglass at their facilities. Maybe some of the smaller businesses may not be able to do that. So basically being able to allow them to operate if they need to. If you have a restaurant that might need to have more outdoor seating to be able to social distance in their facility, looking at basically helping small businesses on Department of Commerce would be one that, we could look at.
And this is Jill Docking. How is that different from the small business one you just mentioned? Having it not go through the Department of Commerce?
That was brought up at the State Finance Council. So that's one that we really hadn't talked about, but State Finance Council looked at that. And so that would be something that I would see perhaps Department of Commerce looking to be able to do through their program. Another one could be maybe an agency would look at some of the population that they serve that are receiving some of our state services. Would an agency propose looking at some type of housing, tenant assistance for rental? Some of the other states, as we've looked at, have looked at doing some programs like that.
Okay, thank you.
Senator or Elise, any comments, questions on this or suggestions?
This is
Well,
Dan.
Go ahead, Senator.
I think one of the things I'd like for Commerce to look at is just looking at business interruption replacement for the folks that were completely shut down in March and April. Maybe develop even a worksheet that's pretty common practice in the insurance industry when you have business interruption based on a catastrophe that's not COVID related, obviously, since those are rare, but we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel if we looked at some kind of program to reimburse the small businesses for the business interruption that they incurred in March and April. More of a grant, which has already been talked about.
Okay, good comment. Elise?
So if we move to looking at some sort of subsidized housing or whatever rental, so that would fall under economic development, right? If we move from infrastructure to connectivity and technology, we talked so broadly about so many different concepts. I mean, with the full committee, one was even trying to get folks more centralized where they could, have better transportation to some of these outlying areas, schools, if we had broadband there. So I understand changing the name, but I still think there may need to be some focus on some infrastructure, was one comment. The other, I wasn't able to attend the State Finance Committee, but I believe one of you mentioned that on unemployment was also discussed, some sort of relief for small business on unemployment. And so would that also fall through the Commerce through a grant or something like that? Or how would that fall through?
We need to look at the state fund and see what we would do with that. We would probably, what I would envision is that we would have kind of that public-private process and then kind of a parallel process for state agencies, and then look at each one of our state agencies to see what those needs would be and kind of present to this executive committee some of those requests from state agencies so that you can evaluate them and see what those requests would be.
Well, the more we're able to open this up, to allow, because there are some creative thinkers out there that truly have been devastated by COVID, the more that we can open this up for an economic development and to kind of really serve as many as possible is a great way to go. So I'm somewhat in agreement with the comments.
Okay.
Other comments or suggestions?
This is Jill Docking. So we had that discussion at the steering committee meeting, kind of a brainstorming. Are we shifting gears here? Just tell me, how much money are we giving out in phase two? When does that happen? And are we shifting the way we're looking at this? I'm not quite getting it.
So what we're looking at in Cheryl Harrison Lee, Executive Director, what we were looking at in phase two was the potential of up to $525 million. And we had as part of the brainstorming session, we need to further refine what that process looks like and who would be eligible. We basically said public and private entities, but we are moving now to refining that process.
Lyle Butler here. I think what we're doing is we're trying to just add and work with our state agencies to see what programs are out there to add to the others that the steering committee has come up with and refine all of that down to give us more of an idea of what's available. This isn't prioritizing one over another at this point. I do think the challenge until we really get some clarification on the broadband, at the steering committee level, there was a lot of discussion by all the breakout sessions about broadband. The concern is that by the time that you lay it in the ground and get it connected, most people would tell you can't get that done by December 30th. Mm-hmm. So the question then comes back to how can we work with our school districts and others to get connectivity, and a lot of school districts got creative and set up hot spots in their communities to help so that people that didn't have internet service in their homes could be able to connect and be connected to their schools, but that didn't happen everywhere. So there's lots of things I think we can focus on to do something more quick, unless we find out from the federal government that the monies, as long as they were encumbered, and I guess that's a question that Cheryl is working on, right?
Cheryl Harrison, the Executive Director. That is correct. That question's come up from several states, and we don't have a response on that yet. We've been told that a few weeks ago, we were told we were getting additional guidance. We understand that we should get some additional guidance here soon. And it is our hope that we will have a response to that question in the guidance.
So I have a comment, Elise Martini. So I am totally understanding as we get new guidance and continue to get guidance, we're going to have to refine the process. But we had a great group of 20 of us, a full group committee. I think everybody was there at our first meeting. We're meeting again next Tuesday. And I don't want for us to have to start over or feel like we're redirecting them from, from some of their input and guidance that they gave us with the full committee. So I understand refining, but I also want to make sure that we kind of stay on task as a total large group too.
Lyle Butler, totally agree. Cheryl, are you getting enough? Have we answered your questions
Yes.
to this point to give you?
Cheryl, the Executive Director, yes, thank you.
Okay, any other comments on this agenda item on round 2 discussions? If not, the last official agenda item is the meeting schedule, and I think our Executive Director outlined that we will be, a regular meeting we'll be scheduling next for 2 weeks from now. And that, if I'm correct, so that'll be on July 6th. And the steering committee will be meeting on June 30th. And the State Finance Council is coming up this Thursday. Those are obviously if something comes up and we need special and we need to call a special meeting, we will try to get with you and your schedules so that we can stay on top of it. But that's what we have planned for the next couple of weeks. Are there questions on that or concerns with the time frames on any of that? And we will let you know if you don't have a chance to tune into the State Finance Council. Obviously, Senator Denning will be there, and Harrison Lee will be there, our Executive Director, and I plan to be there. But we will inform the rest of you after that is over what the results were of that discussion.
Lyle, Jill Docking, I wouldn't mind tuning into that webinar Friday so I could hear what they're talking about. Can I do that?
Yes, you can, and we can send you the public streaming link so that all of you that can't can at least listen.
So
Please.
this is Jill Docking. That'll be to tell all the recipients in every county, kind of walk through the details. Is that correct? That's the purpose of that Friday? Answer questions.
Yep.
Cheryl?
Executive Director Harrison Lee, yes, we're going to give them kind of an overview of eligible expenses, what's not eligible, any clarification on the resolution, we'll be talking about the resolution as well, and the schedule. And that is aimed at recipients, that's aimed for the counties.
And Elise Martini, the question I had is on the June 30th, do we have a time designated yet for that steering committee, or is that just going to be the standard afternoon in Topeka?
I don't believe we've polled them yet for the time frame. I'll have to check and see. But I don't think we've got that time committed yet.
Thank you.
Lyle Butler, is that going to be a virtual meeting at this point, or is that an in-person meeting?
We have not firmed up the details on that meeting.
Okay.
It most likely will be a virtual meeting.
All right. And we're planning on the July 6th executive committee meeting to be virtual as well.
Cheryl Harrison Lee, Executive Director, yes.
Okay. That concludes our agenda items. And so at this point, I'll move for adjournment of this meeting. And we thank you all, the executive committee members, and appreciate the staff members that were on today for their support behind the scenes, and those that presented today. Appreciate their work. It's a big project, and I'm glad that we can hopefully help the state of Kansas a little bit as we work on this effort along with our steering committee. So thank you all for your attendance today and your participation. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.